Um, Today what I would like to do is play with the idea of music. There might be some note-taking that you might want to consider looking at. It's going to be very multimedia-ish. When we were doing the discussion the other day on all the other things we can do, the topic of music came up. And clearly, music is one of those things that has potentially a profound effect on us, much more than we really consciously realize a lot of the time. Have any of you ever worked, let me ask you this, and I got several things I want to mention at the beginning of this. Has anyone in here ever worked, well, let me ask you this first of all. What's the most, and this is appropriate for Halloween, what's the most scary movie you've ever seen? Did anything come to mind? The Notebook? I don't know. I don't watch movies very much, so I don't.
It's a real man.
I hated a Chainsaw Massacre. I hate that stuff.
Yeah. Chainsaw Massacre? Okay.
I thought the video.
Exorcist was horrible.
I don't watch that.
So, let me tell you a quick story.
My cousin was like, I gotta watch this.
The scariest movie I ever saw happened in 1976. And I remember it was a movie by a guy who nobody knew at the time named Steven Spielberg. And it was a brand new movie, and I remember they advertised this thing for months. It was just going to be the blockbuster, and it was a huge movie. I remember the place where I went to this movie no longer exists, and it was there were lines around the block to go to this movie. This was down in Provo, and there was a lot of BYU students who were down who went to the movie, and we were there just living there. It was Jaws, and I know you're like, come on. But if you had never been to that movie and you had no idea, if you had never seen that movie before, and
Special effects weren't out yet like they are today.
no, there wasn't quite the, we weren't nearly as techno savvy as we are now. But I remember that movie. I mean, you'd hear that music going, and then suddenly, you know, you didn't know what was going to happen, and then the shark would pop out, and popcorn was flying all over the place. There was a line of people right in front of me, all BYU co-eds, that were just screaming out. And it was more scary to listen to them. But I wondered after, and that really was, I mean, it was a really frightening movie to me. Exorcist is the worst movie ever for scaring. But this, I couldn't even watch that one. But this one was just frightening. Now, the thing that's interesting about that, for what we're talking about here today, is, have you ever tried watching Jaws and turned off the sound when the those scary times are happening? It's not even funny, is it? It's just like, whatever. Oh, there's a shark. Okay, fine. Now he's chopping the guy in half. Wow. It's the juice of that show is the music. It really is. When you listen to that music, that's what pulls you in. Has anyone in here ever worked at a restaurant of some kind? You have? Where do you work?
I did work at the Grub Steak. It's
the Grub Steak?
In Park City.
Where did you work?
I work at Wingers over here.
Wingers? Does anyone, who else has worked in, where do you work?
I work at Olive Garden.
What kind of... It's pretty good. So,
I can tell who hasn't had breakfast.
yeah. What kind of music do they play there?
Italian.
It's Italian. Do you know what kind of music they play at the Grub Steak?
Country.
So it's
It's Western.
a Western place? Do you remember?
I don't even know. They make like a mix.
But music was always going on. I remember on one occasion, we went to this place, it was called Ryan's, back east. And it's like Golden Corral times 5 for food. It had so much food. You would see people wobble in, and then they would kind of roll out. They could barely fit. The largest people I've ever seen eat at this place. But what was interesting, we went in there, and my parents came in, and they were visiting us from back here, and so we went to Ryan's. My dad likes to eat a lot of food, and so we went in there, and you pay for it, and then you go in and get a seat, and then you just fill your plates, Golden Corral kind of thing. And we were sitting in a place where they had this music that was really annoying. It was like Duran Duran feel, 70s pop, late or 80s pop music that was just fingernails on the chalkboard kind of feel. And I said to the lady, "Can you turn this down a little or a lot?" And she said, "No, I'm sorry, we have to have the music playing like that." I said, "Really? Because it's really annoying." And she said, "I know, and we can't do anything about it." Well, why did she say that?
It makes you want to eat to drown it out.
I just want to get out of there.
What? I heard it over here. Because why? You want to get out of there, and the people don't want you to keep eating their food. Because you paid for it first. Has anyone in here worked in a really classical kind of restaurant where you have?
Grand Canyon, the Elks Bar. It's like a big.
So you pay for it afterwards or first?
No, you pay for it before you go to meet.
So, okay. So has anyone ever worked in a place where, or been in a restaurant where the waiter, waitress, whoever comes to you and says, "Would you like this round, and what would you like next, and what would you like?" And they're keeping a tab, and then you pay for it at the end, right? What kind of music do they play at those places?
Nice.
Yeah, it's very nice, isn't it? It's usually, whatever it is, it's going to be soothing. Is there a reason for that? Absolutely. I love this feeling of being here. I think I'll order fifths. You just keep eating because it feels good. That's not an accident. And that's the way every commercial, there's very few accidents when it comes to when people professionally include music for specific reasons.
I work at Arby's, and I can't tell you how many people come through my drive-thru and go, "It's good news." Every time.
They've hooked them in, right? So they have got some. I bet you love that, don't you?
Like, oh, that's the first time I've heard that today.
Go away. Now, the reason why I include that, as it has to do with stress and stress management, there's a lot of music, and I'm going to show you, we're actually going to kind of get a feel for the kinds of music that has been shown to be not just psychologically or perceived, but physiologically has an effect on us towards relaxation. There's plenty of good research that's getting done on music. Now, and I want to explore that quite a bit today, but let me say from the outset, my intention is not to try to get rid of anything you already have. Remember, once when I was in college, I was down at Utah Valley, and there was a guy who came through, and he said to us, or he was on a mission of some kind to save us all from the evils of rock music. And we liked rock and roll back then. We liked, the real kind of music that. But he said, "I'm going to prove to you that this is evil." And I'll show you some in just a second. He says, "I'm going to prove to you that this is evil music. You should burn it all." And so he had, and this was back when all we had were records. you know, the turntable things that they do that now. Yeah, that's what we had to listen to music back then. And so he brought all this music. He had the big stack of records, and he says, I'm going to prove to you, and I'm going to show you kind of what he did, sort of. He used some different ones, but I want to let you see. This is kind of entertaining, but my purpose is not for you to think, well, now I got to get rid of that. Mike's not trying to make you get rid of your stuff. Whatever it is you listen to, I'm trying to expand. After today, you'll have a wider view of, oh yeah, that might be something I might want to add to my library, not necessarily take away what you already. I don't care what you listen to. But there's a website that, yeah, that guy was, this Andy McKee is amazing. I don't know if you can see this very well, but whoops. So what he did, and this is what he did with records, but he did the same, essentially this. So, and back then we were huge Stairway to Heaven fans. I don't know if any of you even remember that. But if you play it forward, this is what it sounds like. So he played that for us, and we were like, yeah, that's what we like. We really like that music. And then he said, okay, let's see how that sounds backwards. And he actually had his finger on the record, and he played it with the needle on the record backwards, and this is how it sounds. And these are the words he claimed are in there. Let's see. Proof that, well, and there is a pretty long story for how Stairway to Heaven was actually written, and I don't doubt that it's a questionably.
So now I'm concerned about the Pokemon rap.
So
Please do that.
we'll show you a few of these.
Empty space.
I don't know if you remember.
I want to hear the Weird Al one back.
Oh, is that what it is?
Okay, so yeah, whatever. My name.
Yeah, what's the rest of it?
Oh, dude, yeah, my name is. That's a name.
I love this one.
My name is Sadie. My name is Sadie.
Favorite song.
I like this song.
JeffMilner.com. I don't know this song.
It's
really, really scary.
Oh, Pink Floyd.
They actually wrote it back.
Pink Floyd does a lot of stuff backwards. Then backwards. Okay.
What's the Beatles one? It's super
Oh.
There's one, yeah.
Britney Spears.
You ready for this?
Yeah.
Oh, Brittany!
This next one, this was one of the ones he showed when we were having this presentation. The guy was showing us. He showed us this one. He showed us this one. These guys weren't out by then, but this one was the one he said this is absolute proof that this is by Queen.
Another one bites the dust. Another one bites the dust. Ow! Another one bites the dust. Hey, hey! Another one bites the dust. Hey!
Backwards. This was one of the other ones. Okay, so a little questionable. This one is interesting. This was from the Beatles.
Oh, this is a cream.
Everyone is doing
Number 9.
No, this is a cream.
Number 9. Number 9.
This was at the beginning of the White Album, about 1975.
Number 9.
Backwards.
What? Yeah, beats.
I know what you guys are talking about. What?
Let's see the kids.
Pop. Backwards. So, did I miss?
We gotta do the kids song.
Where's Pokemon?
My name is.
Gotta catch them all.
Which one? That was the number 9 one.
Did you do empty spaces?
Yes.
Yes. What about
Did we hit them all?
There's one that's here.
Oh, you know, like Beatles.
It's like
Electric Light Orchestra. They did a lot of backward stuff on purpose.
The music is reversible. But time.
See, some of these, they deliberately put it backwards. The others, it just happened to show up that way. So,
You know what's interesting?
Ring.
Fingers comes out of it.
So,
Like the weight, it's actually got a weight.
now that we're all a little creeped out, Halloween, I guess, is appropriate. But like I said before, this is not intended for you to question what you're listening to. I remember, well, I'll talk about that later. But there's so music is so much a part of our lives. There's no way to get it to, get rid of it or try to. We can't help the effect that it has on us. But what I want to show you today is some interesting studies, first of all, that they've done on various types of music, and then expose you to maybe some music that you hadn't seen before that isn't anything like this stuff, but is useful for stress management.
Have you read about the studies they've done on the water molecules with music?
Mm-hmm.
And how it changes the structure of it, and like different music can make it look really ugly and unstable, and then like uplifting music can strengthen it.
I don't have that with me, but I have read that it's in Europe. Let me just, you could, if you wanted to do an interesting search, just online, just type in music research on or something to that effect, and that'll be one of the most prevalent ones that come up. I want to tell you some others that are quite interesting. There was one study that was done by a guy named Dr. Singh. He was in India, and I want to read this because I want to make sure I get this right. What he did, let's see, well, I'll tell you about this first of all. The way he set this up, he did this study with bamboo plants. And, well, you've all seen probably, if you have a flower, just like a pot with a flower in it, and you put it in a windowsill that's facing south, what does the flower do? It kind of goes, right? And then if you turn it 180 degrees, a few days later it goes, right? We've all seen that, right? Why does it do that? There's something about the light that it likes, yeah. There's something about it that it tends to be attracted to. And I've seen dozens and dozens of studies that have looked at the effects of different things on plants. Well, this guy wanted to do one on the effect of music on plants. And so he chose bamboo plants specifically. And the way he set this up, he had one group where he had speakers all around it, big bamboo field. Another bamboo, that was the control group. They didn't get any. And this group got music. And the one difference is they got music that was the sound of a lute. And I want to give you an example of what that would sound like. Let me just do this really fast. Let's see. So this would be an example of what he had playing. This is a lute. So he had this kind of music going continuously. Both groups, the experimental and the control group, got the same amount of water, same amount of sunlight. Everything else was the same, except this music was constantly going for the experimental group. And he wanted to see if there was a difference in the growth. And what he found was, and I want to read this so I make sure I get this right. He said, in 1 month, the music grew 72% more leaves than the control group, and they were 20% taller. He then he did the same thing with rice paddies, with just this particular kind of music, and compared to the national average, he just set up speakers around some rice paddies. Compared to the national average, his harvests were 25 to 60% higher than the national average.
So farmers need to invest in speakers. And annoy everybody else in the country.
Yeah. The next study I want to tell you about was done by a lady named Dorothy. Let me spell this right. R-E-T-A-L-L-A-C-K. And the way she set up this study, it was really an interesting one. When I first read this, I thought, that was so cool. She set this up where she had plants that were set up in chambers. One, two, three, four, 5, 6. And so she had the same plant in each of the chambers, the same kind of plant in each of these chambers, you know, and they all had the same water, they had the same exposure to sunlight. The one difference is in each of these chambers, she had a different kind of music playing, a different genre of music. And so, like in this first one, they had country and western. The next one, she had the music of Claude Debussy, piano. This next one was jazz. This next one was Baroque music. You who are music people, who's our Baroque composers? Chopin, yeah, he would be one. We're looking at Haydn, Handel, Bach. Very structured music. It's very, you know, we'll show you some examples, but it's not a lot of flavor in these. They're a lot of structure. They had music from Indian sitar. Does everyone know what that is? I'll give you an example of, if I can. Let's see. Here is Indian sitar music. It's very beautiful. And it. Okay, so this would be an example of. Here, I'll move this forward some. So that's a sitar, what he's playing. Got an idea? Okay. And then the last one, the last group was Led Zeppelin. So the last one was Led Zeppelin. I don't remember how to spell that. And so she had the plants in there. So you'd have the plant, and then you'd have the speaker with, you know, music coming out of them, quarter notes. And then same thing in each one. She wanted to see if there was a reaction by the plants. And I don't recall how long of a period of time she kept the plants in there, but it was all the same for each one. And then she showed the differences in the reactions. And for example, the country and western one, there was actually no reaction. No surprise. I tried liking country and western a few years ago, and I just can't. Back east, when I lived back east, they said, "Oh, it's something that will grow on you," and I just couldn't. It was, no offense if you like that. Debussy, they actually, in this one, so here's the plant in there, and here's the speaker, and they moved away from the speaker by about 10 degrees. Which I think is interesting because his piano music is really pretty, but the plants didn't seem to prefer it. The next one, the jazz. So here's the plant, here's the speaker. And they lean toward the speaker by about 10 degrees. The Baroque music, I'll give you some examples in a minute. Here's the plant, here's the speaker. And they lean toward the speaker by 60 degrees. And she mentioned that they grew lush and abundant, was the comment, or her analysis. They grew lush and abundant. The Indian sitar music, same as the Baroque. And she even mentioned with the sitar music that some of the plants that were nearest to the speakers actually wrapped themselves around the speakers, indicating some preference for that kind of music. The Led Zeppelin music, within 2 weeks, withered and died. I'm just...
It's just the wrong plant.
It's at 78 speed.
They're playing it twice as fast or something.
I remember when I was studying this quite thoroughly, when I lived in West Virginia, I had, you know how you can turn on a CD on your computer and just let it play, or you can turn on your iTunes and just let it keep going continuously. Well, I tried that with Mozart. I got this CD of Mozart, and I put this plant, like here's my desk, and I put the speakers so they're both facing inward, and here's the plant right there, 2 speakers there, and I went away for 3 days on a 3-day weekend, and I wanted to see if the plant would do anything. And prior to that time, it didn't have any effect. I mean, it was just a normal green plant, no flowers or anything. It was just a green office plant, nothing exciting about it. I came back after 3 days of, 24 hours, or I guess 72 hours of Mozart, and it looked like, well, have you ever seen those cartoons when somebody sticks their finger in a light socket and their hair goes... That's what this plant looked like. It looked like it was saying, "Get me out of here." It had had enough Mozart, you could tell. Something different. I took it home and we tried to, restore it. It never got back to a normal plant. It just... It really didn't... I mean, but you've heard good things about Mozart and Mozart's music, but apparently too much of a good thing wasn't so good for these plants. I remember on another instance, I was talking to some people, to a lady who was doing a study down in Provo. I don't remember if it was with BYU or she was doing it independently, but the way she set this up is she had preschool kids, and she set up 2 rooms. One was, and on the rooms, in the rooms, she had, what do you call it? Painter's paper, what do you call that? Butcher paper all over the floors. And then she put paint and crayons and pastels and all these kinds of things to paint with in the room. And these kids, no supervision, they were just to go in and freely draw stuff. Same with this group. Exactly the same for both groups. The kids were randomly assigned, so they could have been in either group. And then she wanted to see if there was a difference in the quality of the drawings in the pictures between the two groups, and the only difference she had between the two groups was in one group she had classical music, kind of this Baroque stuff. In the other group she had just barely audible, she had AC/DC going. So they couldn't hear it very well, but they knew that there was some music going. And she wanted to see if there was a difference in what was drawn on this butcher paper. So she looked for things like the colors. She looked for things like common themes that went through it. What would you guess? We all know who I'm talking about when I say AC/DC, right? Heavy metal band. The colors for the AC/DC group, and again, these were randomly assigned preschool kids who probably had very little exposure to, it's Provo, very little exposure to AC/DC or any heavy metal. The colors were primarily blacks, oranges, browns, and reds. For the classical music, what would you guess? Yeah, it really was. She was really surprised. She said, "You can't believe it. This is really how it was." The pictures were primarily of the classical were families and sunshine and clouds and puffy white clouds. And in this group, the AC/DC group, there were thunderstorms. And one kid even drew a headstone. She said, "I couldn't believe it. There was a headstone."
They can draw anything, that's what they drew.
Interesting, huh? Rain clouds.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So then what's the logic behind that? How does music affect a plant like that?
Well, at some level there is energy that the plant seems to, just like the sun affects the plant, some kind of energy, the energy of the music has some effect as well.
Yeah, I was about to say, like,
React like with the cells or something of some
If we play with this in the other class a little bit more, but have you ever heard of muscle testing? Has anyone here ever heard of muscle testing? You've heard of it, Corey? So, when I say muscle testing, what they do is they can test people to see how strong they are. Like if I had you stand up, for example, just stand up for a second, and see if I'm doing this right, you two. But if I have you put your arm out, and then I say resist, so resist. Okay, so he's pretty strong. Now, if I have him do something, if I have him think of something that is true or good for him, and I say resist, so I say, so just put this, hold on to this and think of this water. And I'm kind of doing this a really short version, but so resist. Say, yes, just say, this water is good for me now.
It's good for me now.
Okay, and resist. And so he stays strong. The idea is, if we were to have him listening to some music, or even just having a CD that had that music on, most of the time, most people, when they have that on, they will not stay strong. In other words, it's not good for them, that particular thing, and you can test that with anything under the sun.
Muscle testing works really good if you hold your fingers like this, and then you have someone say, like, my name is Caden, and you pull it and it's really strong.
So you go like that, yeah.
And if you say something false or whatever, then it's crazy how weak your fingers are.
Yeah.
Like, keep shaking
And the idea is that your body knows what's good for it, what keeps it strong. Music, and they've done this with music, where they've tested either going like this or with this, almost every single time with heavy metal music, with rap music, with hip hop, that kind of stuff, they test weak. I don't understand it exactly, but sure enough, it happens.
Oh, I was going to say, my aunt actually does this as a profession. She's got a whole tray, and she's like, and she can test, like, and see if you're low on calcium, and then she can actually just give you the vial and see if, like, this medication or this one would actually help you better. And then it's just weird because your body,
It knows.
yeah.
Yeah. If you want, that's an interesting thing. We play with this in the other class, but If you want to look up, just look up muscle testing, and you can learn it on your own. It's really easy to learn, and it's really interesting. So anyway, I don't know for sure. There's a lot of energy that is happening that we don't understand because we can't measure it. Like,
So I like video games too, but then can you apply, so nothing against video games, but can you apply the same concept of music to video games?
what do you mean?
Sure.
You mean the music in video games?
So like if you're like listening to certain kinds of music makes you happy or sad, then playing certain kinds of video games should have the same effect.
Probably.
In a way, yeah.
Think about modern warfare.
Yeah,
You're just
probably.
like shooting
Yeah.
people, like,
There's evidence to show that when you listen to certain kinds of music and you're exercising, you can exercise better. You can have stronger workouts with certain kinds of music. Susan?
I read a study, I just talked in my head about the gaming, and they did a study, and they wanted to test if the violent video games made kids more violent. So they did all these different types of video games, from really violent ones to just really competitive ones to really just neutral. And they found that the studies came that the guys or the children who were more violent were the ones that played the more competitive games, not the more violent games, but the ones that were more competitive. The more competitive it was, the more violent, aggressive the children were.
So Mario Kart Wii would be...
That sounds really weird because some of the most violent ones that my sons play were up there, you know.
Is that right?
It was more the ones that are more competitive, not necessarily
Interesting.
violent. Yeah, you have the ones that are combined, but they found that the ones that are more competitive is more
Well, Mario Kart's violent and competitive. Turtle shell. Red shell. Triple red shell.
Okay, what I'm handing to you right now is a little thing. I want to show you, since we've talked about kind of the spectrum, I want to go to the other end and explore what are those kinds of music that seem to affect us really in relaxing ways.
So you like Italian music, what about Spanish guitar?
Sounds relaxing. I just do that.
That's beautiful. Are you asking if I... Oh, I think it's gorgeous, yeah. Okay. Now, what I would like to do is just kind of introduce you to some pieces of music that are along the lines of what you would use if you wanted to have as background music for studying, or if you wanted to use it to help you fall asleep or just relax. I wouldn't recommend this for driving in a car necessarily. But, oh man. Shoot. Okay, hold on just a second. What I thought was working isn't. Why don't you pause that for just a second? I've got to go. I apologize right off the bat. I can't seem to access my office computer for some reason here. The network's it's not seeing my iTunes. So I'm going to have to do this with CDs. I know that's really ancient stuff, but I'll try and give you the same feel for what I was hoping to do. What I want to show you is just some examples. There's two primary ways, or two primary types of music that seems to be useful for the stress management stuff. And the first of them is classical, and primarily classical kind of from the Baroque period, as well as Mozart. Mozart was a little bit after the Baroque period, technically, but His music, there's been a lot of research. They call it the Mozart effect. Maybe you've heard of that before, where they've had kids who have listened to that kind of music and they do better in math. Or I've had people who are teachers in this class, and they use this in their classroom as background music for their students, and some of the ADD and ADHD kinds of things kind of settle down, and they do better on tests, and they actually start to enjoy the music. And this is not something that I would suggest as, okay, this is your new favorite music. It's just background stuff. But it tends to be useful for the mind. And so here's some examples. Let's see. So this first, oh no, that's not what I want. That's not the one I want. So this would be an example. This one's by Bach. If you're writing this on that page, just kind of follow along. This is called Orchestral Suite Number 3. But what I want you to notice about this music, it's not exciting music. But it's very structured, and you'll notice it has a continuous bass feel to it. If you listen to it, and it's very organized. The brain seems to like this for some reason. Your addictive tendencies to excitement doesn't, but your brain waves love this stuff. Another example, probably one of the most popular of the Baroque pieces of music that's ever been written, and it actually is the only surviving piece by this guy. You've probably all heard this before. This is by Pachelbel. Pachelbel, not Taco Bell. Pachelbel. It's called Canon in D, C-A-N-O-N in D. But this is the same feel of the kind of music that we reach deep levels of brainwave, or we activate deeper levels of brainwave activity when we listen to this kind of music.
What was this one called?
Canon in D. Canon, C-A-N-O-N. Okay. I'm going to move past the other classical music, pieces of music, but that gives you a flavor. And if you just find anything that's in the Baroque period, Haydn, Handel, Brahms, Bach, those kind of composers, tons and tons of research is being done on the effect of that kind of music on the physiology. The other type of music that is similarly useful for reducing stress levels is termed globally as New Age music, which is kind of like jazz. There is so much variation in New Age music that it's kind of hard to pin it down as, okay, this is New Age. But the primary things that we see with these kinds of New Age music is, one, there's no vocals. Nobody's singing. Enya is probably the only one that kind of gets in that direction. But otherwise, we don't really see any vocals. And it's kind of like, the way I like to view this kind of music is kind of like wallpaper. You know it's there, but you don't pay any attention to it, but you know it's having some kind of an effect. And so I want to give you some examples of the variety of these. Let's see. These are the kind that we use in the background of the relaxation exercises.
Elevator music?
No, elevator music is yucky.
I think you want to get out of the elevator.
Shoot. Okay. Okay, so this is, I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 examples. Let's see. This is even a little bit peppy for, this is a group called Shadowfax. It's called Angel's Flight. Okay, now I want to show you another one. I'm going to show you 2 or 3 by this guy. One of the first New Age authors that kind of hit the scene was a guy by the name of Stephen Halpern, H-A-L-P-E-R-N, and he's probably made $1 billion off his music. He's really everywhere when it comes to this kind of background music. Does anyone here play the piano? We have a few pianists in here. Are you great?
Not great. I need to practice a little more, but I play.
You play quite a bit. There's something, I want everyone to listen to this guy because this is really quite fascinating. When I learned about this, I was so mad because it just ticked me off that he did this. But I want you to notice something. I want you to listen to this guy's music, and I'm going to try and find 2 or 3 versions or 2 or 3 examples of the many. He's got about 40 or 50 CDs. They all have a similar something going on, and I want to see if any of you can recognize what it is. So just listen for a second. This is very typical of New Age music, but just listen for a sec. This one is called Spectrums or Earthrise. This is Earthrise. Okay, let's try another one. So you got a feel for that? You kind of sense what's going on? This is Stephen Halpern. This one is called First Chakra. First Chakra. You know, like chakras, 1, the 7, whatever. C-H-A-K-R-A. Okay, so you've listened to that one. Listen to this one. And they all have really New Agey kind of names to them. Or not all of them, but it's a very common thing to name them like blissful elements or whispering sunrise or whatever. They've all have really, like, you're already thinking in the right direction before you even listen to it. Can you tell what's going on with this? Any of you? It's what? What do you mean?
He's going, so he takes a scale and he starts at the bottom and goes all the way up. So he's going note by note like the C scale.
Okay.
The B flat scale.
He does that, but he doesn't, but he's, one thing that this guy does that nobody else had done before that I had ever heard, because a lot of people play that way, they kind of up and down, but he does something that's absolutely unique.
You like it?
Yeah, I do like it. What? I'll tell you in a second. Can you tell? I mean, that is definitely something that he always does, but sometimes he plays chords. He plays, you know, he'll play a chord and then he'll have this hand going up and down. He's always got some background thing going. But I'll tell you for the sake of time. I play the piano and organ, so I'm pretty in tune with this. And every one of you could do this. Because when he plays all his music, it is entirely on the black keys of a piano. Entirely. All of these notes that he's playing on every one of his CDs is just on the black keys. And you can't play, you can sit down at a piano and go shonk and hit all the black keys, it will still sound good. Because none of them are dissonant with any others. They all sound equally good with each other. Chords, rolls, that's all. I was so ticked off. I remember once I was at a conference in Virginia, and there was a grand piano. It was between meetings, and I didn't have anything to do, so there was a piano. There was a really beautiful piano, and I always loved to sit down and start playing. And I just started doing these. I started doing this, and it was this pretty. People started putting money in the jar. Man, I wish I'd have figured that out before this guy. Huh?
You could have been a street black key.
I know, and every one of you could do that. You'll amaze your friends. Sit down at the piano and just start playing black keys, and it can't sound bad. It's so amazing.
Smart guy.
You must have been playing that thing.
Yeah, no kidding.
They were poorly.
Yeah.
None will work. Only the black ones.
It's like, I don't want to learn all the blue keys. The blacks are the
We're running out of time, and I was hoping. This is Carlos Nakai, N-A-K-A-I. This is another beautiful example.
What's it called?
This is called Sentient Beings, S-E-N-T-I-E-N-T space Beings, B-E-I-N-G-S. Now what I'm handing out to you, so mad that didn't work. I'm handing out to you is a list of some, because people say, well, that's nice, but where do I get more? Here's a good start of possible composers that you might want to consider if you want to add these kinds of things to your own music libraries. This is Carlos Nakai, N-A-K-A-I. I've had students who've actually gone to this guy's concert down in southern Utah and said it was mind-blowing. Okay. So, you need one more? So that, in summary, pretty much, music is enormously powerful, can have an enormous impact on us, and as well it can for the stress management kind of stuff. And so it's worth looking at for your own self. Okay, that's good, Susan.